In this video, I'm going to show you step by step exactly how to design the hottest hero trends. So we're going to start off with this base design. Now this is a pretty common, simple layout that we see all the time, and we're going to make it a lot more interesting by morphing it into all of these top design trends. We're going to start off with the isolated components hero. So we take the same base design, but rather than having just one screenshot, what we're going to do is pull out certain parts of this that are important or interesting or features that we want to highlight. First, I'm going to turn off the auto layout, and then I'm going to grab this sidebar. I'm going to change the design a little bit because we want each element to stand on its own. We can make this part a little bit smaller. Maybe we'll give this a stroke as well so it pops off the background a little bit. And then maybe we want to call out the engagement. Copy that and pull that out of there. And maybe we'll also do growth. We'll copy that, we'll pop that out, paste the same layer effect. And so that's just one way that you can create these isolated components in your hero. So what about responsive design? How is something like this going to be implemented and how will it look on mobile? Now, I would say that for something like this, I would consider using adaptive design instead. With responsive design, you're really just scaling everything down to smaller and smaller breakpoints on different devices, and you're not really changing, removing, or adding anything. But with adaptive design, you can completely change or significantly alter the designs that you serve to the different breakpoints. So when you have a lot going on like this, you might want to completely remove some elements or move certain things around, which you can't do with responsive design. So that's something to consider. We want this to adapt to that new breakpoint or screen size. So for this, I might get rid of that growth card and just have these three here. And so this is one way that we can sort of layer and stack things up in mobile. Okay, so let's move on to the Bento hero. How can we turn this into a bento? I want to take these components that I've isolated and I'm just going to move them off of the canvas. All of these are just going to kind of get placed over here. I also want to convert this to a dark design, so I'm going to invert these colors and give us more of that linear style look. And I'm just going to draw out 3 of these. And now I'm going to grab them all. I'm going to put a stroke on them so we can see them. They're just going to be a little bit lighter than the background color. And I'm going to round these out. And I'm going to put that in auto layout. All of these, stretch them out to meet the end of my guide. And then I'm going to put 20 pixels of gutter between them. I want one of these to take up 2 columns and the other to take up 1. So I'm going to delete this third box, or at least hide it. And then I'm going to drag this one out to fill that space. So we have something like this. And then I'm going to copy this layout. I'm going to move it down, make sure that spacing is the same, and then I'm going to switch these two. You can just get creative with this. Try out a couple of different grid layouts with just these empty cards to get a feel for what you want to prioritize and how you want to handle the hierarchy. And so I'm going to make these boxes a little bit longer as well. Let's move this down. Each one of these is going to act like its own little contained ecosystem of information. So imagine that this is one little hero and it's all about that one feature or benefit that you want to call out. So we're going to have a headline and a subheading and then maybe a graphic. And I've just taken these same components and inverted the colors and dragged them in here. And I'm also going to treat these containers, so I'm going to make the background color a little lighter and add a stroke, and also add a little linear gradient to these. You can see the difference when it's flat and when it has a little bit of gradient, it gives it more depth. And that's really the little secret trick to doing dark design in general and doing these bento cards, is that each one needs to be very rich in detail. I'm also going to add a radial gradient on top of this as well, and it's going to go behind all of that content so it looks like a spotlight lighting up everything in that little card. And now we're going to use that same style and just add some more content to each of these boxes. And remember, these components don't have to look exactly like the app that you created. Remember, these are just highly stylized graphical representations. Now, there's something else that I want to add to this, and it's a really popular trend right now, and it's a graphic element that designers are calling God rays. But rather than doing this painstakingly by hand, we're going to use a great little plugin created by Raji King called Noise and Texture. We're going to click on Animated and then click on God rays, and then we can mess around with the intensity of these. We can change how many rays there are. Some of those rays just coming down from the top randomly professionally, and it's just that beautiful touch that we're looking for. These are the little things that make this style so much more interesting than just flat design. It's layering different light and shadows and strokes and textures. So I'm adding another little spotlight behind this text here on top of those God rays. And you can just keep adding more and more details. The trick for this type of design is to be really, really patient, take your time, and focus in on all of the fine details of every single element. Now, looking at the mobile version of this, I am again just going to scale everything down and stack it. So these bento cards are now all going to be the same width, and they're just going to stack on each other. And we're just going to use the vertical space to create more room where we need to. Next, we have the lava layout hero, starting again with the base design. And then I'm going to go ahead and remove some of these components again and just place them off to the side. I'm going to remove auto layout and then slide everything over, left align that as well. And I'm going to grab a square instead of a frame because I'm eventually going to flatten this image. And then I'm going to use my Pexels plugin to add an image of just someone on a computer. Take this one, for example. Similar color palette. And we're gonna drop this right behind the hero. Now I'm going to take my pen tool and just freehand a shape to create the contours that I want around this text. So I'm gonna follow this text just like this, and I'm holding down Shift as I do this so that my lines are nice and straight and I can just follow it around like this. There are our lines, and I'm going to add a fill now that's white. I'm gonna remove the stroke, and I'm gonna place that fill right behind the text. So now it's a square, and you can see where it's not even and where it's even, and I can adjust this so that the spacing is really perfect. So I'm gonna click on this vector. I'm just gonna scoot everything down here to give it the right amount of space. I'm not using rulers right now in the effort of saving some time, but of course I would recommend that you do that. So that looks pretty good. Now I'm gonna select all of these by holding down Shift and clicking on each one of these little dots until they turn blue. And then I'm gonna come over to this corner radius in the vector attributes, and I'm going to add 10 pixels. I think I missed one there. Select that, 10 pixels. Now everything's nice and round, and you might think that you're finished, but the trick to making this look really professional is that you also need to round the corners of the image to match the contours of the text. So how we're going to do that is by taking this vector that we've created that goes behind the text, this one right here, and we're going to copy that and we're going to duplicate it. And we're going to put it together with this image. And I'm going to grab the image, I'm going to grab that vector, and then I'm going to come up here and I will subtract the selection so that now these two are together and this vector cuts out the shape on top of this image. So we're getting a little closer. Now all we have to do is select this layer here, this image and vector layer, and we're going to flatten that. So once we flatten that, we can select this image again, hit enter, so we can do the same thing here, and then we're going to make them round as well. We're going to have that same 10 pixel radius. Now we can add our button back in here, and the last thing I want to do is make sure that I round these end corners as well, so the whole image needs a good 10 pixels on it. So now everything is nice and rounded, perfectly contoured, and I'm going to go ahead and put a few components over here to spice things up a bit. You might be thinking, Liz, how can we implement this? How can we code this? Well, that is a little bit trickier, but there are two ways that you can do this. What you can do if you're coding this is use padding behind this text and then position it absolute over this image. But what you'll notice is going to happen is this. When we position this text with this padding and the background color over it, it's fine except for these corners. We can even round all of the corners of the image, like the 4 main corners. Do you see this subtle difference where this turn right here and this turn at the bottom are sharp and not rounded? That's because we're not actually cutting this shape out of this image. So one way to do that is we can just do this. That way this allows us to change the length of the text or change the text completely, and it will reflow to shape with the contours, but we will have to compromise and have these sharp edges. If that really bothers you and you want it to perfectly match the contours, then what you'll need to do is cut this SVG vector shape out of this image, and then when you're coding it, apply a CSS image mask, so an SVG mask, to follow this exact shape. The downside of that is that every time you want to change this text or resize it, you're going to have to recreate this image and re-upload it again to your website. So those are two ways to do it and something to keep in mind. Looking at the mobile version of Lava Layout, we're going to want to adapt this to this screen size. So perhaps the text will no longer be here and we're going to move it to the top and take up some of that vertical screen real estate that we have to work with. And because this is kind of a cool image mask, we can kind of keep that there and keep the layered components on top of it, create something that looks like this. Next up, we have the Callout Hero. So I'm going to paste this dark design. We're going to use this one as our base design for the Callout Hero. For this, I want a bigger headline, so I'm going to change this to 50, and then I'm going to left align everything. For now, I'm going to remove auto layout so that I can freely move things, and then we can add that back in later. I'm going to pull apart some of these elements and set them aside for right now. I'm going to use these first two bento boxes at the top, and I'm going to drag them into my hero section, and I'm going to extend this section down. I want to make some room here for different callout elements. So the first thing I'm going to do is reduce the size of this box. I'm just going to take the height down and reposition these elements. Then I'm going to grab our button and I'm going to right align this right above this small box. For one of my callout components, I want to use some social proof. So I'm going to grab my ellipse tool and quickly draw out 4 circles. I'm going to grab them all and I'm going to put them in an auto layout that goes horizontally with 6 pixels of spacing in between. And then I'm going to use a plugin called Content Reel. Make sure I select all of the ellipses, go to images, select avatars, and now I can apply avatars to all of those ellipses. And then I'm going to drag that right in here and we're going to use this as a little social proof callout. I'm also going to add an arrow here and I'm going to use a plugin called Iconify, which is great for finding general icons and shapes, and just grab this one that looks kind of hand-drawn. So we'll import that icon. I'm going to change this to a secondary color, something that pops but is still complementary to the purple, and then resize that and place that right here. I'm going to add a little description text here, and then I'm going to put that same linear gradient over that text to give it a little bit of dimension. And now it's really just up to you to add other callout elements. So maybe there is a tutorial video or a walkthrough. I can add a button here to play that video. I'm going to place it here. I'm going to make it look like it's a part of that box and add some text below it. And you can just keep on adding different elements, components, and layers to this to create a really cool Callout Hero layout. Looking at the responsive or adaptive version of our Callout Hero, so you don't always have to display all of the same elements and you can reorder them when you do this in an adaptive way. And so if I just move these side by side, you can see the difference here. This button is now at the top. This social proof is pointing to that button. We've moved this play button over. And just remember to be strategic about it. Check your data. If the majority of your users are on mobile, then you really might want to consider designing mobile first, making everything optimized for those devices, and not adding in too many of these flourishes or tiny components that you can't easily vertically stack. So take a look at who's using your site and design for them always. So this is the tide to scroll trend, and we're going to create something like this so that when the user is scrolling down the page, all of the elements are just going to roll and animate in. Now this is more of an interaction animation trend, and you can apply this to any of the other trends that we've covered, but I'm going to use the isolated hero components for this one. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this here, and I'm going to call this tide to scroll start. So in order to achieve this, we're going to create a prototype, and I'm going to duplicate this final screen here because this is actually what it's going to look like in the end. And I'm going to change this to tide to scroll end. So now we want to break apart the components in this one so that it can all fit back together when we start scrolling and end up like this. First thing that I'm going to do is grab this header and I'm going to drag it out of here. And I like to see all of my components off canvas when I do this, so I'm going to select this main frame and make sure that I uncheck clip content, and we'll move this out of the way. The next thing I'm going to do is take this component and I'm going to move it off. And if you ever have trouble doing this when auto layout is on and it's always trying to jump and clip into your auto layout, just click and hold and then use Shift and Spacebar and hold that down while you move it, and that way it won't jump into auto layout. So I'm going to do that for all of these. Click and hold, Shift Spacebar, drag this down here, and drag this one out here. Okay, and I also want to drag this down a bit. So there's not really a mouse scrolling action that we can use in the prototype, so I'm just going to use a mouse hover to imitate this action. I'm gonna click on that first frame, add a flow. Then I'm gonna connect the dots to this frame right here. And then instead of on click, I'm gonna switch this to while hovering. And it's going to go to the end screen. I want it to smart animate and I want it to ease out, and I'm gonna do about 1,000 milliseconds here. So now when we play our prototype and I hover, it looks like that. I love making these videos and I hope you all enjoy watching them. And if you do, please give it a like and make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so that you can see more of them. Don't forget to watch this video next.